Okay, welcome this evening. I'm going to call to order the City Council meeting for August 24, 2020, and Urban Renewal Agency. With declaration of quorum, all members present, other than Mr. Barone. Do you have an excuse? He's out of town, family. He's out of family. Okay. So we have Mr. Barone excused. Let's see. We do have opportunity for now able to have guests in our audience, but we also have an opportunity to participate online. Hermiston has a YouTube channel for video streaming through the YouTube channel. And you can also participate in the comments during that session. I will allow opportunity for that public comment after all the people here have spoken. There's a phone number you can call in. It's 339-209-4508. They will be muted until there's a public comment. I know that we've been struggling with the electronics this evening, so it may not be up and running for public comment just yet, but I believe on YouTube it's video streaming, right? It's streaming, everything's okay there?
We're good, yeah.
Public comment calling in isn't available just yet. It should be in just a second. So please join me in flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome everybody this evening. We have several opportunities for citizen input during our agenda. The first opportunity is now. If you would like to speak to the City Council about anything not on the current agenda, now is that opportunity. If you would like to come up to the microphone up front, and I believe we have some sanitation procedures.
Yes,
there's some wipes and stuff up there, so after you've spoken, if you don't mind cleaning up afterwards for the next speaker. Come up to the podium, which that looks pretty new to me, so is that you, Brandon? Nice job, that looks really nice. I like the logo on it. Come up to the podium up front, state your name and address, direct your comments to me, and try to limit your discussion not more than 5 minutes. Other members here this evening that would like to speak to non-agenda items. Come on.
Jackie Linton, 111 West Beach Street, Hermiston. Hi, I just wanted to say that I participated in the BLM protest on just last week. And so I had to confront a couple of people on our side, you know, I don't cuss, and I don't like that kind of thing. So I wanted to make sure that it was respectful, and people, you know, you can say we just want to chant or whatever you want to say like that, but you don't have to do other language. There were some people that did the rolling coal, the trucks got together and they did that, and I want to thank the police department for ticketing them. I found out later that they did ticket them, they stopped them from doing it. They made about 3 trips of just doing that. So everything, I think went pretty well. I left around about 8 o'clock. And I was told some things that they started hurling insults back and forth. A couple of people on the other side got drunk and came onto the other side. But they weren't disrespectful or anything like that to them. They just wanted to say that the people that were doing the coal thing wasn't part of them. They had nothing to do with them. And the people that were there from on the other side of the street were majority from Portland. So there was a few Hermiston folks that got really upset with all of them there and having the Confederate flag. We found out that they were from Portland, majority of them. So I let them know that so that they can continue to see that Hermiston is a pretty good place and people can voice their opinion, whichever side you're on, and be respectful at the same time. And so I do want to thank the police department for stopping those young boys coming in for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate your leadership team in working with individuals, whatever side protesting on, and providing them some structural guidance to make sure that it's not an inflammatory situation. You know, we've seen some communities where it hasn't been so positive outcomes, really destructive outcomes, and I think we're all fearful of that happening and coming to our community as well. And so glad to see that things worked out and wasn't any destructions to lives or businesses in the area as well. So I appreciate your leadership. And I actually am going to ask the chief some questions later during the mayor's comments about some situations regarding the protest evening as well. So if you want to stick around. Are there others that would like to speak? Okay.
Mayor Dressman?
Yes. Is there somebody online?
The phone system is working. There's no one.
Okay, thank you. So the phone is up and running now. So if you're watching us online and you would like to participate, they have to *6 is the number you have to press to speak. So it is up and running now. Thank you, Lulu. Nobody? Okay. We're going to move on to the consent agenda, items A through D. Do we need to pull any of those? No. Seeing none, can I get a motion for approval for consent agenda items A through D?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilor Primer, seconded by Councilor Smith to approve consent agenda items A through D. Any public comment on consent agenda items A through D? Anybody on the phone? *6.
No one.
Okay. Roll.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Some of us have learned to use the mic better than others. I can't hear Manuel, and see, it sounds like David yelling at his. All right, so now we're on to public hearing. South Hermiston LID number 322, continued from 6/8/2020.
Yes, so again, we're requesting the council postpone the hearing or continue it. We do know that the application is moving through the process with EDA. We're hopeful that it could be soon, but I don't want to say that out loud. But we've been talking with the EDA staff, and they have told us that it's been making progress. It had been approved at the regional level, and it was in Washington, D.C. being reviewed. So we're hopeful we'll have news soon.
Okay, so so we have to, at the August 12th, 2019 City Council meeting, this hearing was opened and continued to October 28th, 2019. At the October meeting, the hearing was then again continued to January 13th, 2020. That's January meeting. The hearing was continued to March 13th. At the March 13th meeting, the hearing was continued to June 8th. At the June meeting, the hearing was continued to August 24th. Got your update. The administration is recommending that we again continue this until 3 months.
November 9th.
November 9th, okay. Until 7 p.m. meeting on November 9th. Okay, can I get a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we continue this till November 9th.
Good. Okay, then moved by Councilor Primer, second by Councilor Gutierrez, that we continue the hearing to 7 p.m. on November 9th, 2020. Roll call.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. And the reason we continue to continue this is because the process requires us to notify the community within, or make a decision within 90 days. And because we're waiting on federal government, they've been slow to respond. And so that's why we've had to continue this.
Right. We don't recommend forming the LID unless we get funds, so we're waiting for that.
Okay, perfect. Now we're moving on to item number B, annexation 4N2815, portion of tax lot 200, 1307 Southwest 3rd Street. Are there any declarations of conflict? of interest from the council?
Mr. Mayor, I must declare a conflict of interest.
Okay. Mr. Primer has declared does he have to declare a potential conflict of interest or an actual conflict of interest?
I'm related.
Okay, so that's probably an actual conflict of interest.
You have to declare an actual conflict of
Yes.
interest and state the reason for some.
Because
It's an actual conflict of interest as I am related to the parties.
Okay, thank you. So then he's eliminated from voting. Yes. All right, hearing guidelines will now be presented by the city staff.
Thank you.
Okay.
The City Council is holding a hearing to consider a request for annexation to the City of Hermiston. City Council will consider the request and make a decision based on the criteria established in 15005 of the Hermiston Code of Ordinances. The applicant, Jeff Newman, wishes to annex an approximately 13.8-acre tract of land located on the south side of Southwest Desert Sky Drive and west of South First Street. The applicable substantive criteria relied upon by the city in rendering the decision to annex the property is contained in 150105 of the Hermiston Code of Ordinances. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the criteria described above or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulations which the person believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue by the close of the record at or following the hearing, in person or by letter, precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes an appeal to LUBA on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. City Council shall grant such a request by continuing the public hearing pursuant to ORS 197-7636B, or leaving the record open for additional written evidence, arguments, or testimony pursuant to ORS 197-7636C. For this hearing, the process begins with the staff report, followed by testimony from the applicants and other supporters of the application. This will be followed by opponents to the application, and finally a rebuttal by the applicant will be allowed. The public hearing portion of the procedure will then be closed, and the City Council will consider the information and testimony received about findings of fact and render a decision on annexation.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. We're now going to open the hearing. City staff will now present its report.
Is everyone able to hear me?
It's a little bit weak.
Okay,
You
let me
can speak into it a
Is it
little
on?
more.
How's that?
It's a little better.
A little bit. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff Newman has submitted an application for annexation of 13.8 acres of land located south and east of Southwest Desert Sky Drive and approximately 500 feet west of South First Street. The land is proposed for annexation with an R1 zoning designation. The land is located in the urban portion of the urban growth boundary and has a low-density residential comprehensive plan designation which corresponds to an R1 or an R2 zoning designation, and the applicant is proposing annexation with the R1 designation. The general character of the area surrounding the property is low-density residential. There is a single-family subdivision to the north and west consisting of lots between 9,000 and 14,000 square feet. The land to the south and east is developed at a rural residential density with larger ranchette development in single-family dwellings on roughly 2-acre lots. City services can be readily extended into the development from their existing terminus at the north property line of this parcel in Southwest 3rd Street. All services are capable of serving any proposed development on the property. And the applicant has a pending subdivision application for the land with 14,000 to 18,000 square foot lots. Testimony was received stating the land is within the boundary of the Hermiston Irrigation District and the land receives 14 acres of water rights. The district requests that the applicant work with the district to discuss fees and restrictions necessary for the preservation of these water rights. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on proposed annexation on August 12th. Following the conclusion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission recommended that the City Council annex the land as proposed. The applicant is also proposing a separate partition for this property, which will create 3 lots, which will change the legal description of the property. Because the legal description will change as a result of this partition, which will be considered by the Planning Commission next month, an ordinance is not before the City Council tonight. We'd rather annex it with the clean legal description of the partition plat. Assuming a positive decision from the council, the ordinance will be prepared for adoption after that partition plat is filed. However, tonight, following the close of the hearing, the city council will need to adopt findings of fact in support of the annexation, and they are attached to your staff report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spencer. So we're going to move on to the public testimony portion. Again, if there are callers on the line that would like to participate, we will ask for your participation after the people here in person are allowed to speak. Again, it's *6. And we're going to start with the proponents, followed by the neutral parties, followed by the opponents, and then any callers. So are there proponents that would like to speak?
Excuse me, yes, I'm Dave Lorenzen, engineer with K3. I'm working with Jeff Newman to help develop it.
Everybody hear him okay? Yeah. Can you speak or move it maybe down towards you a little bit more, Dave? There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think the staff report described pretty much what it is we're going to be developing.
The conference has been locked.
We're developing 31 lots with this phase of the development will range from a half acre to a third of acre. Some of the larger lots will have irrigation rights, which we've been working with the irrigation district to do that. The other parcels that are 2 parcels will be developed and annexed in future phases of this development of this subdivision. So,
Thank you. Are there other proponents? Okay. Any neutral parties that would like to speak? Oh, I should probably ask on the phone. Is there anybody on the phone that's a proponent that would like to speak? *6.
Namaste.
Okay. Neutral parties? Opponents? Any neutral parties or opponents on the phone that would like to speak?
Namaste.
All the callers on the phone now will be placed on mute, and this hearing will be closed. City staff will now present its findings of fact.
On page 61 of your staff, of your city council packet, you have the draft findings. There are 13 findings on annexation and 2 on zoning designation. They demonstrate compliance with the statewide rules for annexation as well as the city code for public noticing, and compliance with the criteria in 15005 regarding annexation.
Thank you. So if I understood what you mentioned earlier, tonight we will be approving the annexation, but there won't actually be an ordinance that comes back in front of the council until...
Yeah, well, basically, because they have the pending partition plat, right? The ordinance would record and get in conflict with the recording of the plat, and you'd have these conflicting legal descriptions. So we're recommending wait to pass the ordinance until the partition plat goes through, and that would be, so you'd probably see an ordinance 2 meetings from now, most likely.
So you'll refresh our memories when you bring it back. We approved this already. This is why it's coming back at this time.
Correct.
Any other council discussion? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve findings of fact? So moved. Second. Is that Mr. McCarthy? Yes. Moved by Councilor McCarthy, seconded by Councilor Harden, that we approve findings of fact. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes. Abstain.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously, 6 with 1 abstention. 6-0 with 1 abstention. Can I get a motion to approve the annexation?
So moved.
Second. And moved by Councilor Davis, seconded by Councilor Myers, that we approve the annexation. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes. Abstain.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes. Motion passes 6-0 with 1 abstention. And then we'll see you guys in another month. Congratulations. So moving on to item number C, text amendment section 157.136 accessory dwelling unit. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest from the council? Seeing none, Hearing guidelines will now be presented by the city staff.
The City Council is holding a hearing to consider amending the Hermiston Code of Ordinances, Section 157-136A-3G, accessory use provisions authorization. The applicant is Kelly Nobles. The applicable substantive criteria relied upon by the city in rendering the decision to amend the zoning text are contained in 157-226 of the Hermiston Code of Ordinances. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the criteria described above or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulations that the person believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue that close to the record at or following the hearing, in person or by letter, precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure to provide statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to LUBA based on that issue. For this hearing, the process begins with the staff report, followed by testimony from the applicants and any other supporters of the application. This will be followed by opponents to the application. Finally, a rebuttal by the applicant will be allowed. The public hearing portion of the procedure will then be closed, and the City Council will consider the information and testimony received and vote to approve or deny the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. We will now open the hearing. City staff will now present its report.
Tonight we are here to consider a citizen-initiated text amendment from Kelly Nobles. The applicant requests that the provisions for accessory dwellings be expanded to include single-wide manufactured homes. Currently, single-wide manufactured homes are limited to manufactured home parks in the city, and homes placed outside of parks must be multi-sectional. As we've been interpreting this with accessory dwellings, we've interpreted it to mean that manufactured homes used as an accessory dwelling must also be multi-sectional. The proposed language amends our accessory dwelling code to state that where a manufactured dwelling is proposed as an ADU, it does not have to meet the city's multi-sectional requirement and does not require a garage or carport. Now remember, the garage or carport requirement is codified in state law. The legislature, as of this year, no longer allows local governments to require off-street parking for ADUs. So whether or not the garage or carport goes in, we as a city are no longer requiring that for the accessory dwellings. Two additional provisions are proposed in the code. The first states that when a manufactured dwelling is less than 1,000 square feet, that the primary dwelling shall remain on the lot, and if that primary dwelling is removed, then the ADU must also be removed as well. This is added in to echo the city's manufactured dwelling policy that does not permit manufactured dwellings of less than 1,000 square feet outside of parks. The requirement to remove the manufactured dwelling in the event of a demolition is to prevent creating a backdoor path to placing single-wide dwellings outside of a park and then demolishing the primary dwelling, leaving only the single-wide on the lot. And the second provision adds clarifying language that a larger dwelling than the existing primary dwelling may become a primary dwelling. So if the ADU is 1,800 square feet, and they put it in and the existing home is 1,000, you could say that the new home is the primary dwelling. It's not something that really affects the homeowner too much, but it's more for accounting purposes. It's a staff level. Remember that when a ADU is placed on a lot, the utility billing changes to multifamily rates, and it's important that we're able to track whenever new dwellings are going in. As a result of our noticing, we received comments from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon stating that they support the intent of the ordinance but questioning the adequacy of the goal 10 findings that were presented. And so we went in and added about 10 findings to the goal 10 findings at the Planning Commission level, which we believe sufficiently address the issues raised by FHCO. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on the proposed amendment on August 12th. After considering the amendment as proposed and the implications of amending these ADU standards on the city's residential housing stock, the Planning Commission made a recommendation to the City Council that the amendment be denied and the ADU standards remain in the code as it exists now. So to support the Planning Commission recommendation, there are findings in your staff supporting denial of this decision. If the City Council were to choose to override the Planning Commission recommendation and adopt the ADU text amendment, Ordinance 2307 and findings in support of that ordinance are also attached to your report. Should the City Council choose to accept the recommendation and deny the text amendment, a motion to adopt the findings in denial will be needed tonight, and then no other action would be necessary. If you choose to adopt the text amendment, a motion to adopt findings and support would be needed, and then a motion to adopt ordinance 2207 would be later on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spencer. Again, like we had on our public testimony section earlier, if callers would like to comment, we're going to take people in person first. If you're on the phone, then you'll be asked to press *6, and you can testify during that time period. We're going to start out with any proponents who wish to speak, and this would be proponents in favor, or in favor of the denial, or in favor of?
In favor of amending the text.
Okay, so in favor of the text amendment, section 157.136. Yes?
Thank you for the time. My name is Kelly Knowles, 1050 Stevens, Yuma, Delaware, is my residence. And I think we all know that the accessory dwelling unit language the state has tried to get everybody to do is basically for affordable rentals. You know, I mean, it can be used for somebody's family in the backyard, things of that nature. Some of the concern about affordable rentals going into somebody's expensive home or expensive neighborhood, that don't hunt, really. I mean, why would somebody do that in their backyard to their expensive home and take their property value down? And at the planning commission meeting, the two real takeaways for me that they gave me, one of the commissioners said, I don't want that next to my house, you know, so I understand it. I don't blame them. I don't think that people would tend to do that. And then the other commissioner said, why would somebody put a mobile home in their backyard and increase their property value? It doesn't make sense. And he's right. It doesn't make sense. Really, these are probably going to go with somebody like me that has rental properties and has a big enough lot that could add another rental property for the purpose of being, it's not to increase the property value for resale or it's for another rental property. And because the price point would be lower, you know, the fees are lower, the expense is lower, it can be more affordable, which is basically what they have in mind. So I tried to do this. Clint gave me a permit 18 months ago for an ADU, not far from the hospital. I have 2 1-acre lots, and everything was going fine. The test holes for the septic worked fine, but then we got to the point that DEQ, Randy Trott, Salem, the manager there, DEQ had not written the language for ADUs yet. They weren't opposed. They just hadn't written the language. And Randy told me last September, by September we'd have it, and then it was the first of the year. It's been 18 months. Now he tells me, don't count on it with the COVID thing, you know, so we're not going to have ADUs in the UGB as a result of that, you know, unfortunately, but that's kind of why I've come to the city. And if we don't want them in the city, you know, okay. I'm just the right person that has, I'm in a neighborhood, I have 8 houses, all in a 12 house area, and the backyards are fenced and secluded. I could probably get a double wide in there, but if I put a single wide, I have room to have double wide, double parking, to put some parking off street that's not required. But there'll be a little more room in the footprint, you know. Trying to squeeze a double wide into some of those, if you do want to do it, it's allowable. You can put a manufactured home in now. It just has to be double wide. It kind of doesn't make sense. The ADUs are supposed to be small and fit in. So it just made common sense for me to ask to allow, and you know, we could do a couple of those, but you can revoke, amend at any time. I believe that's what Randy or what Clint said. So if you think about it and it makes sense, you want to try a couple. You know, I'm the right person to try it. If you don't like what you see, it's easy to, before it gets carried away and gets out of hand, it can be amended and it can be revoked as a procedure. You know, but I think that it makes a lot of sense to do it. The single wides would have to be HUD approved, which is a standard, and they also have to be good, super good sense for the newer thermal packages. So it's not, you know, it's got to be a nice unit. It may not be brand new, but it'll be a nice unit that goes in the back of the house where, you know, cosmetically, they're not going to be stuck out in front and look like an eyesore. I mean, that's my intention. So I'm just asking you to think about, if you do want ADUs in the city, it's a really nice option to do. I'm willing to try a couple, and if we don't want them, then, you know, do what you got to do. Thank you for your time.
And Lily, You have the timer thing going, right? Okay, I didn't. Wasn't even trying to ignore you. I was just, we normally have a timer that tells us where we're at, so I don't want to make sure everybody has the appropriate time for following guidance. Any other proponents? Any neutral, anybody on the phone, star 6? None? Any neutral parties? Anybody on the phone, neutral party? No. Opponents? Okay. Anybody on the phone, star 6? Okay. We're now going to close the hearing for testimony. The city staff will now present its findings of fact.
I think at this point, rather than going into the findings, it'd probably behoove the city council to kind of get a feel for which way you're leaning on whether to accept the planning commission recommendation for denial or to go ahead and approve and override the planning commission discussion. The findings in denial start on page 83 and are almost identical to the findings in support. I changed some of the items on our housing stock because no matter what you do, we have an excess capacity of about 8,000 dwelling units in our residential land supply. So this goes in and adds about another 350 or so units that could be added by making this adjustment. So we have a large land supply and the ability to increase it more. Should you choose to approve the request, the findings and support start on page 79.
So, questions, Clint. Was Mr. Nobles accurate in the fact that we could revoke this should it be put into place?
Doing a text amendment like this that expands your ability, yes, you can revoke it later through another text amendment, but under Oregon law, when you restrict something once it's in place, then you have to provide a direct mail notice to every single property owner who would be impacted. So while you can expand the use by just doing a legislative notice in the newspaper, revoking that use would require mail notice to every landowner who has residential property in the city of each.
The other question I had, if we expand this opportunity, you said it allows 350 something new potential dwelling units.
Yeah, and I base that on the legislature's guidance on all of the multi-use housing, the duplex law, and the cottage cluster law, and all of that. They say that when you're trying to estimate how much of your land will actually build out and take advantage of these new laws that they're requiring, they say to use a 3% modifier. So 3%, that winds up being 3% of basically our vacant land. So
does that limit future decisions about growth as far as annexation and approving of other, like tonight we talked about this?
It does not, but it will impact slightly when we're trying to do a buildable lands inventory. We'll have to add that 3% into our existing land stock. So it basically increases our existing land stock a little bit without changing anything.
Right. We've had a lot of really interesting conversations at the council level in regards to ADUs and the forced mandate by the state level. These are the rules we will have to apply within the community without any specific community feedback. And so, I know that we've had some heartburn over having that forced down our throats that we have to do this. So I know that you guys have some shared concerns regarding that. Are there questions that you guys have about this? Comments you want to make?
So it boils down to the single wide, is that what the issue is?
Yeah, this would prevent single wides and park models as ADUs basically.
But it can include the tiny houses.
Tiny houses already fall under a different code. You actually could already do those. The way that manufactured dwellings are permitted, they have to be DMV certified, HUD certified, get a licensed and titled. So they're treated a little bit differently than like a tiny house that you build on site, or even a modular one that might be assembled in pieces on site. This is only for over-the-road items.
And of course, the single wides have to be of a certain age
Correct.
to be permissible in these areas.
They have to be HUD certified and super good sense on the energy, and that winds up being about I want to say somewhere between 1985 and 1991, right in that area. They can't be any older than that.
But at this point, we have no option as far as ADUs, right? I mean, the state said this is what you have to allow.
This would be expanded, what you wrote up.
It's what we're trying to be.
You'd be expanding what you already were forced to have to do. Right, yes.
Who pays the accessory dwellings are subject to $200 permit fee and necessary building permit and construction permit? That's part of the person, the landowner?
I'm guessing so, is that right?
Yes.
That's right, yes. Other questions, comments? Is this being done elsewhere in the county?
It can be done within the UGB, but not within the county as a whole. It was limited only to lands within UGBs when the legislature passed it.
No, I'm suggesting this design for amending the ADU structure. Is it being done in Umatilla, for instance?
I have not researched that.
Okay. Do you know, Kelly?
I'm not sure. No.
Yeah, you don't know if there's been a change in their code there? Okay.
So I guess my question is, why just the UGB? I'm sorry, why just the UGB? I mean, why is it only allowed in that area and not in the county?
Well,
that is because overall statewide planning goals are trying to limit any kind of urban development or dense development to within urban growth boundaries. The state is trying to discourage any residential development outside of urban growth boundaries. The minimum lot size for rural residential has gone from 2 acres to 4 acres, and it's kind of building on that. The overall state's policy is try to limit housing to within urban growth boundaries as much as possible.
I think they had different tiers for different population bases too, didn't they?
Yeah.
Certain size of the city.
That's true for the duplex dwellings. For accessory dwellings, the cutoff is like 900. It was very small.
And I think if we remember back to our conversation about that before, it's also the way the state controls growth. And so there's a lot of cities, communities that are abutting against their UGBs and they want to expand or annex in more property. Well, if you add ADUs or duplexes or triplexes, whatever, you've now doubled or tripled the amount of property you have within your boundaries. And so then you don't need to apply for expansion. So it's been a conversation at the state. I agree with Mr. Noble's intent as far as trying to provide additional affordable housing or options. We just have to decide as a community if that's the option we want to consider. Any other comments?
Especially where we're talking about having small trailers and all of these types of things, where we're able to say, put in a new unit, so my new unit is a used trailer. Who's going to determine whether or not that's going to be sightly, if it's going to be more problems,
Right.
those types of situations. Because I can see that type of thing coming in and making it really difficult to make the way that it developed.
And I think that was the expression that was expressed at the planning commission meeting is, are these going to be attractive? Do I want this in my neighborhood? We sometimes have poor images of single wide trailers that look broke down and in bad shape. And so I don't think that's what Mr. Nobles would do, but that is the potential. that I think the planning commission was worried or concerned about. Other comments? Okay. So then you have a decision in front of you as to Mr. Spencer's comment. I guess, how are we leaning? Do I have a motion?
I would make a motion to go along with the planning commission's finding.
Okay. So motion to approve findings of fact and deny.
I second that.
There's been a motion to approve findings of fact and denial. Roll call.
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Do we now have to have the findings of facts, Gary, read in the...
We don't generally read the findings, you made the motion to adopt.
Okay, but normally you talk about the findings of facts, but you didn't because you wanted to hear what this conversation was, so I just want to make sure that that was clear.
So you need to adopt the findings of fact to support the denial.
Right, that's what we just did.
Okay, that's
Good.
okay.
Good. That's how I understood what we just did, right? Legally? Good. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to ordinance number 2307, text amendment to section 157.136 of accessory dwelling unit. So do we need to move on this one?
We don't.
Okay, so this one we're going to cross off?
Correct.
No action. Okay. Resolution number 2165, authorization to execute and deliver a full faith and credit financing agreement.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as we've been working through the process to get financing for the City Hall project, we asked our financial advisor to do as we talked about in our goal setting, which was to take a look at our existing debt. Is there any added advantage for us to refinance, do other things with that debt? Now, they haven't completed a full look at that, but as they took a look at, we have a couple of loans with DEQ that we use to finance the improvements to our wastewater treatment plant, recycled water plant. And those, even though the interest rate is 3.1% on those loans, we can gain approximately $800,000 in savings if we refinance those and do them in the same debt issue that we do with the City Hall. We would leave the same expiration date, so they would be retired at the same time, which is 2035. So at your last meeting, you approved a resolution to authorize us to go get the debt for the City Hall project. This resolution will allow us to do the debt to refinance those two loans.
So you're not suggesting we're going to roll this into the City Hall debt? This is a different borrowing?
Well, it's essentially doing the same, putting it in the same debt, but it will set up a payment schedule when we sell the bonds that will separate, we will still be able to use the sewer revenues to pay the debt. We'll still be able to retire them in 2035 and rather than go the full 30 years to the City Hall. So they'll be set up in different schedules, but it just gets us at a lower interest rate.
Why wouldn't we want to save the taxpayers $1.4 million?
That's why we're here tonight.
I mean, I don't want to suggest that this is a no-brainer, but I also want to make sure that we're not making a mistake here as well. So, I mean, is there any reason why we wouldn't do this?
No, we had a great conversation with our financial advisor. There's just really no reason not to do this at this time. I mean, just simply that we don't want to, but it's in the same process. We save some of the costs that go along with each issuance. We have to pay attorneys and other people every time we issue debt. This would roll it into one, so we save that second time. There's just lots of reasons this is the right time to do it.
But the debt for the wastewater debt is culminated or terminated at the end of when it would have been.
That's correct. We keep the same termination date of 2035.
Okay.
And this also helps our ratepayers pay less money.
Correct.
So if it costs us $1.4 million less over that 15 years, then we don't have to pass that along, because it's a paid for cost service. And so our ratepayers pay for that added cost. This would actually potentially decrease future rate increases.
Correct.
So, okay. Any other comments? Questions? Okay, so we have before you resolution number 2165, authorization to execute the regular full pay credit financing agreement. Any motion to approve resolution 2165?
Some
Second. Then moved by Councilor Kremer, second by Councilor McCarthy, that we approve resolution number 2165 and lay it on record. Any public comment? Anybody on the phone, star 6. Roll call.
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Workforce Taxi Incentive Program. I'm guessing this is Mr. Morgan.
It is.
Yes, so Mr. Mayor, Council, this evening we're asking you to implement a one-time limited duration change to the pricing structure for the West End On-Demand Ride Cooperative, the work taxi ticket program, by essentially making, when new people come in and sign up to be on that workforce taxi program, they will automatically receive 4 free taxi punch cards, which amounts to 40 free rides that would expire at the end of February for the ride portion, but it would be for people who come in and sign up for the program through the end of December of this year. The main reason for doing that this way is really to drive future utilization and drive awareness of the program. All transit systems, whether it's a bus system or this type of on-demand transit system, a lot of the challenges that they face in terms of acquiring ridership and usage is people just simply are apprehensive about systems they aren't familiar with and they don't understand. And particularly for something like if you're going to work, you don't want to be late, you don't want to get stranded somewhere, those types of things. And so also the way that the program is set up, it's set up in punch cards of 10 rides per punch card. And so we charge people for each ride, basically aggregated in 10 ride punch cards. And so for like somebody who's lives inside of the city and also works inside of the city, that 10 punch card comes out to $25. Well, if you really aren't familiar with the program and not sure if you're going to like it, you're basically faced with the choice of putting out $25 for something that you may not actually ever use, but maybe one time. And so that's why this program is essentially to get people to experience the program, get familiar with it, and become long-term users of the program, which ultimately the hope is that prior to the pandemic and the associated unemployment rate, one of the biggest challenges that we heard from our employers is just simply access to workforce. And so this will help reduce a barrier to connecting workers with their jobs. And so that's ultimately the goal here. Also, I understand that it may seem counterintuitive to be giving away rides for free, but also I think this is in the best financial interests of the program long term, because you'll remember the Oregon legislature with House Bill 2017, they authorized the 1/10 of 1% payroll tax, so we all take home 1/10 of 1% less in our paychecks every week now, and all of that, those funds go toward funding public transit. And so we receive, that's where the funds to pay for this program come from. There is no City of Hermiston local property tax or otherwise City of Hermiston revenue that goes toward covering the subsidy cost of this program. It's entirely split between the rider, they pay for 1/3 of the cost, and then we subsidize the remaining 2/3 with that payroll tax from the state. And so those funds were a competitive grant process, and so it took, as Mr. Nobles had mentioned, with some of the challenges when the legislature will pass a new law and then the state takes a long time to actually get around to implementing it. We had submitted this application and there was still a lot of rulemaking going on, and so we didn't get the program up and running until last October, which most other transit agencies also didn't. But the 2-year funding cycle runs through this coming June, and so out of the approximately $250,000 that we were allocated to receive over the course of that time, to date, we've only spent approximately $35,000 in subsidizing those taxi rides. So there's a substantial amount of state resources that we'll have to be able to cover the subsidy through December by covering those rides through the end of December. And so hopefully then that will improve utilization of the program and will help people become familiar with the program and utilize it long term, and then give us a stronger application moving forward so that we can make sure we receive those funds again when we have to apply for them again this spring. So with that, I'm just asking for a motion to amend the work taxi program's pricing model to allow for 40 free rides in the form of 4 free punch cards through the end of December of this year.
Some of them.
Yeah, he's not the mayor. So, Mr. Morgan, if I understand this right, I can walk in with $25, buy a punch card, and I'm going to get $125 worth of rides.
Yeah.
If I do it between now and December.
Yep.
It's a good deal.
Yeah.
But they do have to be used for home to work to home. You can't just buy it and then go the midway to lunch.
Yeah, well, so the way that they're set up is they're coordinated and they're tied to where people work. So they have to come in and sign up for the program. The way they do that is they bring proof of employment. Typically that's in the form of a pay stub. And so then, a taxi ride is comprised of 2 endpoints, the starting point and the ending point. And so when people come in and they sign up for the program, we issue them a color-coded card, and then we just simply write into the employer address, we write the employer's address on that card, and that's the only controlling point on there. And the reason why we do, other than the fact that it's color-coded, so the pricing corresponds to the color-coded portion. So the lowest price one is for someone who lives inside of the city limits of Hermiston, and they also work inside of the city of Hermiston. So if you get one of those, I think they're orange, then you can call the taxi and they'll take you from your home to work. But then if you're wanting to go to the grocery store after work or something like that, and it's still also in Hermiston, they'll come and pick you up, but they'll only, the start or end point has to be at your place of work. And so then you can take it to the grocery store, wherever else you need to go after that. So that's kind of how the program works, is the taxi ride has to either start or end at your place of employment.
So for the lunch, you could go from work to lunch and then lunch back to work and use those tickets. But once you are going from somewhere that's not your work address or not going to there, you couldn't use these tickets.
You couldn't use them on, the weekend.
So instead of it costing $2, and this is only applicable to city residents.
So the program as it's set up is and that's why it's the West End Ride Cooperative, so it's set up by zip code. So the overall program is for the Hermiston, Umatilla, and Stanfield zip codes. But the challenge for those people who don't live inside the city limits is that because the taxi is based in the city and it takes time to dispatch out to Umatilla and those types of places, the price does go up. So the way that it's structured is they have a standard rate that they would charge to say go pick somebody up out in McNary. The way that it's set up is for each one of those prices, the subsidy covers 1/3 of what that is. So that's why there's different rates per whether you're in the city, you're outside of the city within the Hermiston zip code, or you're going to Umatilla or Stanfield.
And I guess I was referring to I knew the work kind of arrangement, but this special bonus, that's to anybody within that?
This would be for anybody within that, again, because there's no city of Hermiston funds going into this program at all. Yes. Okay.
Did you say they have to be new applicants?
So it was just easiest to kind of explain it that way, but there's only, I think, 50 current users on the program, and so from a tracking standpoint, we'll also make this available to people who are already signed up on the program, but so we'll just have a sheet of the people who are already existing on the program, and we will issue the 40 additional rides if they come in and request them.
I guess my question is, how's the program doing at this point?
Yes, so I think I didn't include those numbers, but you can see that we've reimbursed about $35,000 worth of rides to date. I think that translates to, last I checked, about 500 rides so far. Of course, like with all transit options around the country, we were seeing our numbers. We launched it in early October. We were seeing our numbers starting to creep up there in October, November, December, January, and then they almost dropped to zero in March, and then they've kind of slowly started to come back after that.
So right now, for $25, you can get $125 worth of taxi rides. I think that's about 50 cents a ride right now. So if you want to try out the system, or haven't tried out the system, now's a great time to do it.
If the best.
If it's best.
So is this going to places like Boardman? I mean, they will take it back.
No, it's only within the Hermiston,
Only within
Umatilla.
this area right here, right?
Yeah, the Hermiston, Umatilla, Stanfield zip code, so.
West Umatilla County. Any other comments? Yes, Dave?
Only Hermiston, Umatilla, Stanfield zip codes. Could the program cover the cost of transport between those zip codes, but then you would pay an additional premium if you needed to go to Boardman, for example?
I guess we would cross that bridge when we come to it. We haven't had that issue come up yet. I'm trying to think how that would work, because again, it would be specifically tied to where their place of employment is. And so I suppose if you were employed in one of those zip codes, but you lived in Boardman and you were able to somehow get a ride in, because we've had those questions come up before, but there mainly been people from like McNary asking if they could go get picked up somewhere, and I had to say, well, you are eligible for the program. So we can work with people that way, but it would have to be tied to where the person is employed.
But I think there's another program that is also working to make that more complicated.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why it doesn't apply, this work taxi program does not apply to like going out to Boardman or Oregon, is because in the state's payroll tax, they allocated it by county, and so there was an effort to try and combine efforts between Umatilla and Morrow County, but Morrow County chose to go their own route, and so they've been working to develop a fixed route bus that basically goes from Boardman through Oregon to Umatilla and into Hermiston. They were hoping to get that started back in March, I believe, but I don't think that it's operating yet.
Any other questions? All right, Ms. Davis.
I make a motion.
It's been moved by Ms. Davis, seconded by Mr. Gutierrez, that we amend the work taxi program pricing model to allow 43 rides in the form of 4 free punch cards through December 2020. Any public comment? Anybody on the phone, star 6? Okay, roll call.
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes unanimously, 7-0. So, great time to try out that workforce taxi program. Very cheap. So, July 2020 financial report. Mr. Crosby?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our first month in the new year, it hasn't been a repeat of March, April, and May. It's gotten a little better, but the forecast for the future is suspect. Always start with the Urban Renewal District Agency. First month's results in the fiscal year generally really don't portend any trend, obviously. Because you look at this and, oh my gosh, it's 95% down on property taxes. Well, we only forecast 19,000 based on our historical collection process. I don't put a lot of stock in that. At a quarterly basis, I will look at it more closely. Expenditures, apparently we didn't spend anything in July, so doing good. General fund resources, actual revenue for July was $447,000. The balance of that was a transfer of HES in lieu of taxes of $600,000, and our new overhead cost allocation processes contributed another $446,000. Now, the HES in lieu of taxes is a one-time transfer. We basically say what had been paid prior years on a monthly basis, we now take something less than the total amount budgeted for the year and move it in July. In this case, it's $600,000 of about $625,000 forecast to be collected by HES. The overhead cost allocation amount is a monthly amount that is, at this point, we're taking the first 6 months of the year that the enterprise departments, utility, street, wastewater, will have assessed to their departments. We've gone ahead, in a sense, prepaid ourselves for 6 months of those overhead allocation costs in the new study. We will also then, in January, move a similar amount to zero out the allocation. So that's why you see $1.5 million in collections versus what would typically be in prior years' practice, about $450,000. I hope that makes sense. Okay?
Mr. K, can I
Yes.
ask a question about that, or ask a favor of you? So, I understand the projected graph on there. We're projecting out what comes in each month.
Yes.
I would request that we remove the green line until we actually get those numbers in.
Okay.
Just because the actual revenue year to date, it looks like none of those months are going to have any revenue coming in. Even though we know there are going to be revenues coming in. But don't put the green line and dots on there until we actually have the value.
That's fine.
Everybody okay with that? Thank you. Same thing with the next one.
You make a note of that before I forget. Lose green line until it's actual. Not a problem. Be glad to do it to have it be more informative. On the expenditure side, we had projections of $1.4 million. We came in at $1.045 million. We saved $364,000. It's due to a focused, what I would call concerted, continued emphasis on mission-critical expenses only. I can't find any one big explanation for the $364,000 that was not spent. On the next slide, I'll show you a little more detail. But this is how we're going to try to control our response to COVID and its impact on our revenues, is by ratcheting down our discretionary spending in the general fund departments. On this slide, if you look on the right side, there's the major under-budget departments for the airport, pool, recreation, and police operations. Pool and recreation was obviously a place where we did not spend money in July to the tune of what we normally would have spent. We had restricted availability for their services. And then because we have adopted the overhead cost allocation process to various departments within the general fund, we put bodies where they belong, i.e. city manager, assistant city manager, city recorder, city planner, HR, are now all under city manager and planning. They haven't been broken up by salary across departments in the city. We don't have history of how that's going to work out. So what I have done is, under the departments on the left with the blue arrows, city manager planning, my department finance, legal, well actually legal shouldn't be there. We know that's because of you, Gary. Building inspections, we added Heidi back into that line. Municipal buildings, recreation, park and rider center. We no longer parse out somebody's salary amongst these different departments. So what we've done is take the annual allocation for the expenses in those departments and just divide it by 12. And we will use that 1/12 average through the year until we get 2 years of experience to know what the trends would be under normal terms. So that kind of skews this. If we had not done that, you'd have seen a lot of red for the first 3 or 4 months. That would really be meaningless. And I wanted to give a better picture of what we expect the future to be on a monthly basis with this overhead cost allocation. Seeing no questions. Now we get to the part that is interesting, and I do want to leave the red lines. This is the general fund ending balance through the end of July. You can see we ended up just short of $2.8 million as the balance. You see the projected revenue and expense there. Neither of these have been adjusted for impacts from COVID at this time. I wanted to get a look at what the year looks like unadjusted, probably by next month. I will adjust revenue and expenses based on what we see happen in August. I will have 2 months of information to try to read the tea leaves on to say how much we should adjust our revenue projections, what can we reasonably expect on expense containment. So at present, I would be remiss if I did not point out there are 3 months projected right now that we will fall below the minimum reserve. Those months would be September, October, and June of next year. Now, I don't anticipate we will have savings of expenditures of $350,000 every month, but I expect we will see significant decreases in expenditures similar to that amount that will help alleviate the situation. My bigger concern is, can I match a revenue stream and determine the impact of what we think our revenues will be until we have a vaccine and get back to normal. I'm gonna do my best to read the tea leaves right, but that's going to be an issue for us. There's a couple of things that we would be asking of you in the future, possibly. That is, because the impact of COVID is still unknown at this late date at this early date of the fiscal year, City Manager Smith and I are looking at whether or not we would want to provide a request to the council to temporarily suspend the 15% minimum requirement to something less, because we will have a revenue shortfall, but it's a cash flow issue for us. It is not a true impact on our ability to maintain our reserve. So that is something I would like for you to think about. We will have more structure around that next month, I hope, when we meet with the results of August. Barring that, I will just tell you, unless we have tremendous savings in expenditures, I expect we will be very close to meeting or below our minimum reserve requirement. But we're doing all we can to manage through that. But we may need your help. I'd be glad to entertain questions on that.
Mr. Smith, does this include the CRF funds that was allocated to the state to the city? Have we received the reimbursements for those expenses yet?
We received our first reimbursement, which actually came before the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
And we've not sought other reimbursement at this point yet.
Okay.
We will be.
We've lined up for $550,000 or something like that.
About 540, yes.
Maybe he doesn't speculative, it's not.
And it all has to be spent first before we get it back. So, but we do anticipate that will help us in some areas, but we can't exactly predict that at this point yet. So, any questions?
Moving on. Utility and street funds, there are some variances here that seem wacko on resources for regional water and street fund. Again, it's the impact of what we've done with the overhead cost allocation. We basically messed up their operating results for the first 6 months by taking the overhead cost allocation early. I wanted this to be a true picture of what's happening. Notice the utility fund and HES had minimal impacts, utility fund not at all. So that tells you how sound our enterprise funds are. You will see these numbers improve, certainly by the end of the first quarter. I think definitely by the 5th month of the fiscal year we'll be fine. This is a timing issue. It is not cause for concern at this time after 1 month. We have the capital projects report. I'm sorry you can't read that slide at this distance. We just have too many projects on there to be listed. But I list them all now because 2, I think, are going to come off. I've said this before, but I swear I mean it now. The water tower and the well number 6 tank work on the cathodic protection, we've gotten the final bills just at the end of July. We had not paid them the retainage and the final bills, so they will roll off. But this is evidence, I think, that we have had a very good structure of our pay-as-we-go process on all of our construction projects and the utility funds. I applaud the council for that decision to do this, and Assistant City Manager Morgan for managing it as we have. because it's going to help our infrastructure tremendously over the next 5 to 10 years. And I might also note, both of those projects, the water tank as well as the cathodic protection, came in under budget. Again, a tribute to Mr. Morgan and his superintendents that are managing the process very closely. Finally, I'm going to propose to the council, because the policy on investments say you must report at least quarterly, because this is getting to be such a big deal as far as showing you what we have, I'm going to suggest that if it's okay with the council, I would like to do a quarterly investment report instead of looking at it every month. What you see here, we have pretty much maximized what we can do in the municipal bonds of our portfolio because we limit it to 10%. It's at 9.49% of the portfolio. The government agencies and securities, where we are not limited in what we can invest in, will have anemic returns for the next 18 to 24 months. That market will not rebound very quickly. If we can find something at 0.7 or 0.8%, we consider it a gold mine, because it's just not out there. The corporate bonds are always going to hold their value because we stand first if there's a liquidation in line for payment. I would like to point out to the council, we had what's called an odd lot purchase show up. Umatilla County, Oregon School District, that's Hermiston. We bought $25,000 of their new bond issue. It's an odd lot. It pays a good rate, a little over 3. We thought it would be a good thing to invest in our own community with our odd lot purchase of that $25,000 bond. So I'm very proud of what we're doing. Notice the LGIP rate is now at 1%. That is still a high rate, given what I know the government's doing with their securities at 0.4 and 0.5. I look for another drop in that rate in the next 30 to 60 days. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
No, I think it was a good choice, whoever's decision that was, both of you, to invest in our own community and purchase some of those bonds. And it's got a good rate, so it makes good sense.
I wish we could have bought more, but they were fully subscribed. Somebody sold that $25,000 lot, and our advisor on the pool, you want to do this? I said, yes.
Yeah. Good. Any other comments from the council?
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Smith, looks like you got some work set ahead of you.
Yeah, we'll have some better answers for you next month, but we're comfortable we can find a way through this.
Okay, can I get a motion to accept the financial report as presented? Second. It's been moved by Councilor Hart, second by Councilor McCarthy, that we approve July 2020 financial report. Any public comment? Seeing none, star 6 if you're on the phone.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Committee reports. Anybody? No committee reports? Okay. Mayor's report. I have a couple of things I'm going to talk about. Council candidates. I think we're up to 5 council candidates now. Is that correct? All the people that are here that have already mentioned that they're going to rerun. Councilor Gutierrez said he's not going to rerun. And then 2 new members, I think, of the community have decided to run. And I believe tomorrow is the last day that you can sign up to run for the city council.
That's correct. Tomorrow by 5 o'clock.
5 p.m. tomorrow, got to go see Lily at City Hall if they'd like to sign up to run for city council. So we will have an active race this fall. It's good to hear. Good to see that there's an interest in city council business. One of the things I wanted to ask the council about this evening is maybe some direction from you on the EOTech committee. And the reason for that is we've had several resignations recently from the EOTech committee. A new appointee, Josh Burns, he also then went to the planning commission. He has since resigned from EOTech committee. Luke Swager rotated off the fair board, so he has resigned, and who was the other one?
Steve Williams.
Steve Williams, who was the chair of the committee, has resigned. So we have 3 vacancies, is that right, Lily, on the EOTech committee? And it's a structure, I believe, of 7 members?
Correct.
And it's a council committee. How is it appointed and all that? How is it structured?
So there are 7 members, 1 member that's recommended by the rodeo board, 1 member recommended by the Umatilla County Fair Board, 1 member recommended by the Chamber's Tourism Committee, and then 4 at-large members.
And then Roy and
And then we have council liaisons, yourself and Councilor Brown.
And from the city, we have Al as our district.
Al has been the city representative.
Okay. So, I guess the question I have for the council is that the structure we want to see it continue as? It's been slow moving lately. A lot of that has to do with lack of resources, but we've made some progress on design work. We've done some landscape. We actually know where everything is and what we own out there now. We've made some recommendations as far as layout. You know, if this were to build out, what would this look like in the future? But beyond that, it's been kind of a slow go. And so it could be rearranged to something different. Is that right?
It could be, yes.
Well, you could cut the number down.
You could. That has its pros and cons.
Right. It could be like our, say for instance, public infrastructure committee. But then you don't have as much public input. Is that right?
Right. I mean, you could maybe have a council committee like the public infrastructure, public safety, but with a special invitation to always have an advisor from the fair and the rodeo, if you and the hoteliers as well, or the tourism committee. But that way, business could kind of move maybe a little quicker, and things could be, ideas could be vetted and gone through maybe a little bit more quickly.
Yeah. The challenge that we run into is nothing met in 3 months.
Right, and that's, partially COVID. It has been a difficult committee to get commitments from time, and that sort of
stuff, right?
Yes.
We're 3 members short. I want to make sure that it's fruitful, it's impactful, it's progressing. So I guess I'm looking for recommendations or suggestions from the council or feedback on what they thought about. Or we want to say we like the structure and we just need to get aggressive about going out and recruiting members.
But we've tried that.
Do they have to be required to live in Hermiston? They don't have to be in Hermiston.
No.
So could we maybe push out and ask the local surrounding communities or the county ask for more participation?
So currently, how do we publicize for that?
we advertise on our Facebook page. Do we publish in the paper? Yeah, so we publish that in the paper, and it's on agendas whenever we talk about those. So that's the current way. It's on our website as well.
I agree with Jackie that we have tried, some of us, to reach out to community members and ask for their participation, but that gets challenging, tapping on your friends' shoulders all the time. So, how about other suggestions from the council?
Can it be like temporarily that we lower the number of members required?
And then
as
people apply.
if something's really happening and people are more interested, then maybe you get more people who would want to sit on that board, and we can up it at any time.
Thoughts?
I mean, you can alter we've kind of done advisory committee, kind of working with what number is the right number. We could do that. It potentially puts more emphasis on 1 week of the year than it does the rest of the year to take the numbers down. That's my one concern.
But is it harder to do the business of that committee, always missing members?
Yeah. Yes.
Question, so who seems to be where is the missing link? Is it in the at-large people that aren't showing up? Is it the members from the other represented entities?
Well, currently, the fair doesn't have one.
Right, I believe they have actually taken action, but they haven't sent us the official notice of that. I was told that they had on their agenda, but I didn't hear after that, so.
So, no, it's not one specific entity or another that's always asked.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I serve on a board where the number of officers is fluid. We have a minimum and a maximum number. I'm wondering if we could entertain a reduction to allow for that to exist. But then if interest further people, we could then still entertain additional appointments if somebody was further interested in joining, even though we allow a minimal group number. I don't think I explained that very
No, I think I understand. I haven't seen that before, but it doesn't mean we couldn't figure out potentially how to structure it that way. We could look into that.
I mean, we have identified 4 individual groups that we have to have representation from, right? The other 4 members.
Yeah. We have the 3 represented groups and then the 4 at large.
We have the fair, the rodeo, the hoteliers, and the tourism committee, right? Or is it-
The hoteliers and the tourism committee are the same.
Oh, they're the same, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
And so the 3 groups that have to be there, because they're stakeholders. And then the other 4 positions potentially are at large.
Correct.
So the challenge would be, Mr. McCarthy's suggestion is that how do you determine quorum? How do you have voting rules? And so how does that work?
It is on the maximum, as far as I know, one of the boards I serve on, we have to have, there's 6 of us, and we have to have at least 4 present, so, and that's the minimum that we can do business, so, as compared to,
I mean, that's a standard quorum, right? So,
Fill positions.
yeah.
So,
That's what I'm.
we could, let maybe staff can kind of go back and talk about, look at some other options that we might be able to do, come back with some other.
I want it to be effective. I think it's important to the community. I think it's important to the council. But it seems like, we're not making a lot of progress lately. So, and we have some consultants that have kind of engaged in the process that we're stringing along. So, anyway. I've had a couple of phone calls with the governor in the last couple of weeks, one today. There's a lot of concern around kids getting back to school. And I think we all share that concern. We've expressed that with the superintendent last week. The messaging, continuing the same message that we've said all along. She so much as said today that most of the outbreaks we're seeing are at social gatherings that are beyond the limitations of what she has suggested. And so she's looking for some more local input in that process, including potential enforcement at the local level. And so she's asking more communities to buy in to the process, follow the guidelines, try and get our numbers down so that we can get our kids back to school. Right now, it's looking like April-ish, 200 days before our numbers are below what she's set as the metrics for school. And so her plea to us today was to try and work with our communities to control the social gathering issues, wearing masks, distancing, outdoor gatherings, that sort of stuff, washing your hands, to try and get our numbers down so we can get our kids back to school. And I would agree with that message. I would agree that we need to get our kids back to school. And so we as leaders need to continue to communicate that. And I think you'll probably hear more conversations revolving around local enforcement. There was no identified resources. That was a question I asked today specifically. Are there some resources allocated for this? Because, speaking with Jason, his budget is pretty tight already. We've had a couple incidents lately in protests where people have been working a lot of overtime hours, and our budget is running out. We do have some CRF funds that have been identified to help with that during the COVID situation, but those are limited as well if this is a disease process that continues for another 200, 300 days, whatever that is. And so there is no additional resources coming from the state. That was pretty clear today. So they're asking for community support, buy-in, communicating with your neighbors, communicating with your friends and businesses, continue to follow guidelines to keep the pandemic or the COVID under control. Last thing we want as a community is have another rollback or phase back. We saw what it did to our community for 3 weeks, roll back baseline. I congratulate my community in Umatilla County for doing what was necessary to control the spread of it and get us back into phase 1. Hopefully we continue to do that so we can progress into phase 2 and hopefully progress to a point where we get our kids back to school. Any questions about that or calls that I know you ever did have a call I forgot Senator Wyden last week as well. Just kind of wanted to touch base with everybody out here and what we're doing. There's lots of advocacy at the federal level for additional resources direct to counties and cities, taking the state out of it. He understands that. In fact, the governor mentioned that today, that she would like to see regular direct allocation rather than the state being the placeholder. And I think everybody's in agreement with that. But he expressed his concern in trying to work to make sure that Umatilla County gets the resources it needs to help get out of the phases it's in. I also wanted to say thank you to Jason and his police officers for their extra work. This last weekend was excessively busy. I know the detectives have been busy as well. We had another shooting, unfortunately, within town, and I know they're working hard to solve that one on top of shooting that we had earlier in the year. And so appreciate all of the police officers' hard work and extra time and overtime. I know they stayed late on Friday and Saturday evening to make sure the community was safe. Sounds like they had great conversations with both groups, the BLM group and I'm not sure what they're calling the other group, and making sure that second night's situations were better handled and managed. And both groups seem to have a better experience on Saturday night versus Friday night. As I mentioned earlier, we are a community that allows for discourse, and it's okay to disagree, but it's not okay to be rude, interject vulgarities, threaten or physically harm other individuals, and that's not acceptable, and that's not something I personally will tolerate.
Drunk in public?
What's that?
Drunk in public?
Well, just anybody that is abusive in that process. And so I support our police officers and the hard work that they're doing to keep the peace. And so please pass along my appreciation for all of their extra work and efforts that they put in over the weekend. The question that Jackie brought up earlier, I had a question about rolling coal. I'm not sure what that is. What is that? Can you explain that?
So that's where somebody typically with a diesel engine intentionally revs the engine so that a large cloud of exhaust envelops people standing on the sidewalk peacefully protesting.
So that's legal? I mean, is that somebody can do that to their vehicle? I don't know what the rules or laws or whatever around that are. Can you explain that to me?
So the very first BLM protest that took place on 1st or 395 and Elm, there's a video that I watched. We took a case report specific to the rolling of coal. In that video, you watch a 4-year-old girl completely enveloped in the smoke. It was my opinion that that met a criminal statute of harassment. There's always going to be some conflict, if you will, and that'd be the best word, but between law enforcement action, so probable cause more likely than not, and court action specific to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's my understanding that case that we forwarded did not rise to the threshold for prosecution. So I would like to first of all thank Jackie for her comments, and I know you guys are going to go into an executive session. I'd like to talk to her afterwards. Friday night, we did 11 traffic stops during the protest. Saturday, but we did not do a great job specific to people rolling coal. Saturday, we had a little bit more time to prepare. We didn't have a major crime going on. I didn't have to necessarily worry about officers that were working 16 hours straight and getting them out the door to go home to try to get sleep. And so we made a concerted effort Saturday to utilize other ORS statutes, violations. And we did 13 traffic stops in the daylight. And I was there until about 10:35 Saturday night, and then everything was concluded by 11, and to my knowledge, there was nobody that was on the receiving end of any rolling of coal. And so we pulled people over, people from both sides, revving engines, whatever the case may be, and educated them on the potential statutes that could be in place specific to unreasonable vehicle noise, violation of visible emission limits, and/or speed racing, just the mere accelerating from a stop. And so I think overall the education path worked. In the future, that's something that we will do what we did Saturday by going to both groups as we can and educate, pass the word. We're going to pull people over. Friday was just challenging just because we had the major crime as well on top of everything. So everybody was a little stretched. We were stretched Friday night.
So going back to the ability to fix a vehicle, you can adjust the exhaust legally on a vehicle, so that's what they do all the time. I mean, that exhaust is how that vehicle is driven around town. Or is it only during the situation where it's extreme acceleration?
I'm not sure I'm following you.
Well, I guess the question I have is the emissions that vehicle is putting out can be healthy for those people that are being exposed to this rolling of coal. How can it be healthy for the average community environment if that's the way that vehicle has been fixed to do that? I personally wouldn't want to stand there in a cloud of black fog. I mean, how could the driver of that vehicle who purposely did that to their truck think that that was okay and acceptable to put somebody in that situation?
So I don't have a diesel truck, but I think what they're doing is power braking, revving the engine up, and then letting loose.
So it's not something they structurally change the exhaust to fix so that it does more of that?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. Anyway, not smart and not helping. Chief, if there was some sort of governor's order around enforcement of mandates, do we have the resources, the manpower to implement something like that?
The short answer is no. Yeah, we had on top of the major crime, the 2 protests, we spent about, and I would hope the finance director would back me up on this, we're extremely frugal when it comes to overtime, but we spent the equivalent of 1.5 months of overtime just this weekend. That's not counting myself, Captain Clark, Lieutenant Studebaker, we're all exempt. So to add more to the load while trying to negotiate, I don't know if civil unrest is the right word, but unhappiness or whatever the case may be, that's a lot to ask.
And you're also, being challenged by more homeless, I understand.
Correct. Yeah, I'm still tracking the numbers on that. So for this month, 30% of the day shift calls are 30% of the calls for service involve a transient of some kind, and 24% of late shift calls.
And then also mental health. Mental health numbers are high.
Correct.
And so all of that has been exacerbated essentially during the last 4 to 6 months as well. And then to place the burden of getting the police with the governor's order on top of that is extremely challenging.
So I'm not elected, and I need to be careful what I say, but the Chiefs Association did put out a statement today specific to the governor's hint, if you will, of what we're talking about. They also put out a statement, apparently there's going to be a ballot measure in November for additional decriminalization of controlled substances. There's probably an argument to be made both sides, but for as long as I've been in place, livability issues is one of our department goals, and I think what we're seeing is livability issues being impacted adversely because of some decisions and/or changes, or lack of resources in Eastern Oregon specifically to mental health.
Well, I just wanted to say a special thank you to you and your officers and your leadership for the challenges that they're faced with, not just this weekend, but the last 6 months has been incredible. Your detectives are solving some amazing crimes. I know that they're challenged. They're out there doing hard work. And all of your officers have been putting in extra time to keep peace, and so I appreciate their hard work and effort. Please pass that along.
Yes, sir.
Other council reports.
Mr. Chairman, if you guys are going to say, when the government want the officers to do implementing the face mask, but there's still only a time to do it. There's no way.
Yeah, and I think our best recourse at this point, trying to force the conversation, having more of a conversation around education, saying, hey, this is important to our kids. We've got to get these guys back in school, right? And this is what we need to do in order to do that. We need to reduce our COVID spread. We need to reduce our numbers of positivity. And so making sure that you're sharing that with your family and friends, when you go out in public, you're reducing the amount of social gatherings, quantity of social gatherings, I think. Rather take the education pathway, it's a little less expensive than the enforcement pathway. Yes.
So Jason mentioned about permits. I think that people have the idea that if they post it on Facebook, that they have a permit, okay? And there's just understanding that no permits were issued on either side that I understand. So now, what's the format of issuing permits? Because that's what the mindset is today, I think, is that if somebody posts on Facebook that we're meeting from 6 8, these hours, it's okay.
What's okay?
Well, it's okay to protest. I mean, it's okay.
It's always okay to protest.
Okay, but I'm just saying that, or, you know what, whatever.
What does a group need to file a permit within the community?
Well, if they're just going to protest and they're not planning to impact the right of way, there's no permits required. But, you know, some groups were better at staying out of the right of way than others. And, you know, that I know the officers were out there trying to educate them to keep people safe. I mean, we can't control what drivers do, especially on a highway like that. It just, we need to, you know, if they're on the sidewalk, they can be safe, and they can protest, and they can have their message be heard.
I guess the difference is that when do they cross the line? And the other thing, as far as, you know, was there social distancing there? It was like 100 and some on one side or something like that. You know, and it's, you know, so those kind of things that, you know, I have a son-in-law that works for the Fort Police Department, you know, and they've been at it for how many days now? And it's been night after night, and it's just been incredible what's happening down there, you know. I mean, totally destroyed the downtown basically, which has happened, you know. And, you know, I noticed that when Chief sent out the thing, it was 12:02 is when it came to me, okay, at night, his email. And so, you know, I mean, that, you know, we just can't continue to do stuff like that day after day after day. And I don't know what the answer is, but it, you know, it's because some of these people, to me, it's, you know, one way to help the police is sometimes stay home so that they can go home. You know, I'm sorry, but I mean, it's like you're complicating the whole system. And you know, I know we have curfews and we have things like this, but and we're limited as what we can do and what we can't do. But I mean, it you know, and when you got a bunch of people on one side that's armed, okay, it only takes one stupid incident to cause more problems, okay, you know, and so there's certain things that we can do and we can't do. It's you know, somewhere down the road that we've got to, you know, it's like who's going to be the biggest bully in the block, okay? It's kind of like playground in school, you know, somebody's, okay, this is my territory, this is what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. So, I don't know, it's getting rather, you know, and I'm really thankful for our police department. They're doing an excellent job, and I appreciate it very much. And, but I know the stress and strain that because I hear it every day from my daughter, you know, as far as what's happening down there, and it's just like, you know, and it's an area where these people have been, you know, in a sense, you know, my son-in-law, he's wanted to be a police officer since he was in school, you know, he's a cadet and so on and so forth, but after so much time, it's like, you know, what do you do?
Well, and I appreciate the protesters and the leadership too for, you know, controlling the conversation and controlling people that are acting out, because I think they do a good job to keep it safe. And, you know, we've got more we can do as a community. I think there's more we can do as a police department. We're learning from it as well on how we manage these situations too. Obviously, I agree with you. I don't want it to go sideways like you're seeing in Portland. But that takes leadership effort. And you know, in our protests and future protests, that's a terrible intersection. The lighting there is just bad. You know, maybe a better intersection if it's going to go late that has better lighting. I'm worried about people on that highway in that corner in the dark, and I worry about them being hurt. So, other council comments?
The only thing I'm going to say, thank you, Jason. I know you spent more than a month in overtime. One night. Sometimes we never know if something happened again. You know, another homicide, they spend a lot of extra time.
Well, we could put Jackie on the payroll because I don't like people that cuss either.
And I know your job is to make sure every officer goes all to the spot. Thank you for that.
My understanding, as far as permits are concerned, and I say this because I know there's a little bit of confusion, would be an occasion such as when the Hermiston Freedom Rally took place on Festival Street. An event like that would require a permit because it blocked the right of way. However, if I just want to say, I think the city's doing a bad job of spending our tax dollars, I can get a group of my friends together and just go about saying that. Yes?
That's correct, as long as you're not going to block traffic, you stay on the sidewalk or those kind of things.
Public right.
And there's several events every year. There's the pro-life rally that people stand on the sidewalk. This weekend there was also a march for human trafficking. So there's several events throughout the year that take place.
Something to beyond.
And without speaking of enforcement of regulations such as social distancing, there's nothing to prevent people from doing that on the local level, except the governor said so. There's enough people that don't want to listen to that. Right.
Any other council comments? We do have a executive session. Nothing else from the council? Mr. Smith?
Just have a few quick items. I wanted to let the council know we've been having some conversations with the owner or operator of the farmer's market, and he's been working with the vendors and trying to figure out how to get that started again once we're out of baseline. We may have a cooperative arrangement with them to try to get vendors back in the farmer's market, and again, follow all the guidelines and do those things that we're supposed to. But I know that's a community event that a lot of people enjoy, and it helps our local agriculture as well. Then, along the lines of the education that we were talking about related to face masks or face coverings and those types of things, I've been working with what we're calling the COVID response team to partnership with the tribes, the county, cities of Pendleton and Hermiston, both with school districts involved as well, also the health department and the healthcare systems in both of the larger communities, and just working to get a message out and be consistent and try to help people understand how that can benefit us, especially benefit getting the children back in school. So we're working on that. I think you're going to see a lot more of those messages trying to get people to help people understand the importance of that.
The governor did give credit to Umatilla County today for its response during the shutdown, and she said the results were dramatic, and we're seeing the results of that, and our numbers going down, and so she gave applause to Umatilla County, said rather than Hermiston too, so for their effort.
Great. Then the last item related to the bond process that you passed the resolution on tonight. The regulations of the bond market are that we need to circulate the preliminary official statement to the council. It doesn't require an approval, but circulate that. It'll be, I don't know, I think it's about 20 pages of dense legalese, but we're required to circulate that to you, so you'll see that in your inbox at some point later this week. I think that's it. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the council's willingness to get the executive officers' review and evaluation done. Some of you we had to remind more than once. Lily has been very patient in trying to get that put together for you all, and has done a great job of that. As well as, I believe everybody's security stuff is now done. Is that right, Mr. K? Perfect. So thank you for your willingness to do the education.
Thank you all.
Yes, Lily did a good job of cracking the whip on that one too. We now have an executive session. City Council of the City of Hermiston will now meet in executive session in the Conference Center Rotary Room for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to the review and evaluation of the employment-related performance of the city manager. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602I, which allows the council to meet in executive session to review and evaluate pursuant to standards, criteria, and policy directives adopted by the governing body. The employment-related performance of the chief executive officer of any public body, public officer, employee, or staff member, unless the person whose performance is being reviewed and evaluated requests an open hearing. Representatives of the news media and the designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are excluded. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No final decisions may be made in the executive session. At the end of the executive session, the council will return to open session, which the audience may attend. The executive session will last approximately 20 minutes. So we are in recess.
I took your advice. Yeah, she said she doesn't need It's just in code, right? Yeah. If you get time.
Break your time. Don't need to fall down and break the nose.
You went in there without your walker? Oh,
You're gonna get us in trouble with you later.
Oh, yes.
I tell them, yes.
Here, I'm shaking my finger at you and knowing exactly how you did it, because I did the same thing. Just look like a cave. Yeah.
Okay, we are going to reconvene the regular city council session, come back out of executive session to consider the approval of changes to the city manager's employment contract. There's a motion on, or I would like to hear a motion to approve the contract extension of city manager Byron Smith for 1 additional year. That's the only amendment change to the agreement that we're making. Sorry.
So moved.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilor Primer, seconded by Councilor Gutierrez. Any public comment? Star 6. Anyone still there? Nobody there. Okay. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously, 7-0. Mr. Smith, congratulations. It's been a pleasure to work with you. Enjoyed 5 years? 6 years of your commitment to our community. I think we've accomplished some excellent things. I look forward to another, at least a couple years as we've agreed to this evening, of your commitment to our city and continue to make it progress to make us the greatest city in Oregon. So we're glad this week. Anything you'd like to say?
I appreciate the opportunity to work and work for the council, but also work for the community and just enjoy being here. Thanks.
Okay. We are adjourned.